It's not a badge of honor to have migraine. It's a type of condition. If you don't have it, go and find out what you have
Yeah.
rather than stay stuck to saying it's a migraine and mismedicate basically what you're doing.
Well, it's a real pleasure to have Dr. Angela Stanton on the show. Welcome.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's really a pleasure meeting you. Thank you.
You know, it's fun because I heard about you from one of our community members, and she said, you have got to get Dr. Angela on because you saved her life. And we're going to talk about migraines. And she's an advanced biohacker. I would say she's kind of tries a lot of stuff and looking at trying different things. And of course, we're speaking to a woman going through the menopause transition. So we always blame everything on hormones and menopause. But she, yeah, had a lot of great things to say about you. So that's why I kind of randomly cold called you and said, will you come please to the show and share your knowledge? Because hey, I don't suffer from migraines, but I have never heard about your protocol and what you do. And it's very different. And it sounds quite simple. And it can help a lot of people who are suffering big time and maybe hormones haven't worked and they're looking for other solutions. So I really appreciate your time. And I would love to hear your story because you were living with migraines yourself. And that's how you came up with your own solutions after years of searching. So tell us a bit what you went through and how you came to find your relief.
Sure. It's a long story, so let me just cut it as short as possible. But it's important, the stages. So let me go back to even childhood because migraine, you're born with a brain that is a migraine brain. That is how I define it. And so some children, even infants, can have it as early as within 6 months from birth. So colic is known to be a migraine. And so I didn't have it that early, but I had it when I was about 10, 11, 12, something like that. I don't quite remember when. And it would be seasonal, like it would be associated mostly with summer when all the fresh fruits and the country I'm coming from. And at that time, they're talking about in the 1950s, there was no refrigeration, for example, in homes. And so you couldn't just have ice cream anytime, but in the summer you did. And so nobody put it together with the seasonality, but every single summer I was always sick. And the doctors always told my mother, oh, well, she's just having a stomach bug because it would come on as vomiting and irritable bowel syndrome. So it was like a cyclical vomiting syndrome and an irritable bowel syndrome. That is how it started. So that was already a childhood migraine is what I call, but nobody knew. And then so when my adulthood came, I really was okay up until I would say, if my memory serves right, my first real migraine hit me when I was right around giving birth to my two children. So I was 28 with the first one and 29 with the second one. So that's about the time frame when it was diagnosed as migraine, and it presented in an adult normal form with a headache. And they told me, just like they tell everybody else, that as you get older and your hormones weaken, your migraine is going to disappear. When I was 42, I needed a surgery. I had a complete hysterectomy. So I said, okay, great. So my migraines are going to disappear. But wow, they became worse. Mm-hmm. And I find in my Facebook migraine group, which you're familiar with, that women tend to get their migraines worse after their hormonal changes and variations disappear. So it's quite counter to what people tell you. So it got much worse. And I'm a late bloomer in terms of academics, and I was getting all my degrees all through my adulthood when my children were already finishing their high school age, basically. And so I was teaching with migraine because it was post-menopause, or rather this particular surgical menopause, that I had started to teach at universities and went to conferences to give lectures and all over the place. And I would be hiding in my office between classes, curled up, taking triptans or whatever else was available to me at the time. And so after a while, I said, okay, I can't teach. I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, I was teaching in lecture halls of 300 plus students. You can't do that when you have a migraine. You may even say stupid things because you just can't focus. It's just so bad. It's not the biggest headache in the world, but it's pretty bad. It sort of kind of interrupts your concentration and your cognitive power sort of weaken as well. And so I quit academia completely. I was both teaching and also I was working at the Max Planck Institute, going back and forth a couple of times in Germany, doing some research there. And I just quit everything. I said, okay, I got to figure this out. I can't work. So this was about 2008, 2009, something like this. So we're talking about some time ago when I quit everything. I said, okay, I'm focusing 100% on migraine. And I got every single academic article that was at the time available to me on migraine. And not one of them said anything to me. It all just focused on medication. As I said, okay, this doesn't work. I am a scientist. I have a background in mathematics and physics and chemistry, not just in neuroscience, which was my doctoral degree, but in other areas. I said, okay, let me just pull all the books and academic articles about the electricity of the brain, all the physics of the brain, all the chemistry of the brain, the molecular structures and how things work. And this is how I came to understand what my problem was. And so just like everybody else, sniff cayenne pepper because the huge power make them sneeze. It was worse than the migraine. And so there was just amazing stories of what people did, and I too did, in order to get rid of the migraine. And it's not just a pain, it comes with a whole slew of other symptoms. So you're fighting feeling completely ill tip to toe. And one day, after trying everything I possibly could, I said, okay, the brain uses salt for electricity. Let me try salt. I haven't tried salt yet. That's the last thing, basically, to try. And wow, my migraine disappeared. It was really that simple. But by then, I've tried everything. I was still not changing my diet too much at the time because I didn't quite understand the connection. But I was taking salt. And at the time, I didn't understand how to take salt, when to take salt, how much salt. I had no idea. I just said, okay, here's a little salt. Let me take it. And so it's evolved in me to take it in the morning, first thing in the morning when I woke up, with water, just a pinch of, just grab, swallow. It's horrible, but it goes down. And at the time, my mother was still alive, and we had a lady who was lovely, who became a friend later, who was taking care of her. She was a nurse at the time, and she also had migraines. And so she saw me taking the salt and water. And she said, what are you doing? I said, well, this is helping my migraine. And so she started doing it, and it helped her as well. I said, wait, this isn't just me. So this is how it all started. And then the research focused more on the electrical properties of the brain, or what actually is the problem, what could be the problem, how does it look like, how does it work, and from the perspective of this voltage and what exactly happened, because clearly it was a voltage connected problem, but I didn't quite know what it was. And so that's how it started off. And then, of course, I'm still doing research to this day. I just published an academic article last year on this, of how nutrition connects and how basically to define migraine, because migraine is so poorly defined by doctors. They have no idea. I'm getting about 20% of the people coming into my migraine group who don't have migraines, but are diagnosed as migraines.
This is very interesting. And it's something that, again, I never heard of salt, honestly, such a simple solution. And I don't think it's just like that, but I mean, there's a timing and everything to it. But you mentioned the migraine brain, and you mentioned that migraines and headaches are different. And
Right.
like you said, people come in your group and you're saying, no, you don't have migraine. Maybe they're offended. I don't know. What,
Many are.
what is the difference then between a migraine and a headache?
Okay. And yes, many people coming into my group who I then later tell that they don't have migraines get offended. They feel that they have. But I keep on telling them that, hey, you have some other kind of problem. Let's find out what that is. Maybe that is much more serious than a migraine, because migraine is not a serious condition. It can
Really,
lead to
I know
some.
that people who suffer, it sounds really bad. I thought I would always
It's
say
very
migraine is
bad,
like
but
level headache.
exactly, it's very bad, but it's not going to kill you.
Mm.
But there could be other conditions that come with headache that can kill you. So shouldn't you find that out instead? And so I had a situation, that was a couple of months ago, when somebody was coming in, a new person, and I think it was her child. I can't remember exactly what it happened, but I think it was a son who had what she thought were migraines. And many times in my group, people will submit their blood tests so I can evaluate what's happening. And I looked at that person's blood test, and I looked at maybe even scans. I don't remember if there were some brain scans. Sometimes they put that in as well. And I said, based on the kind of headache and based on what I see here, he doesn't have a headache. He has something else. And you should take him to the emergency.
Oh, it
And
doesn't
she
have
did.
a migraine or doesn't have a headache.
It was not a migraine. It was some other kind of headache and some other symptoms.
Okay.
And I told her that instead of focusing on as a migraine, he was diagnosed with migraine. I said, instead of focusing on migraine, take him back to the hospital, because this isn't migraine. This is something much worse. And so when she came back, I think a few days later, she came back, she told us that her son, or I think it was her son, had 7 hours to live. He got into the hospital because he had some structural problem within the brain, which may have been birth or maybe some accident or whatever, that blocked off a blood vessel. And so he was about to have a major problem with a blood vessel in the brain. And so that was basically a completely different kind of headache, completely different symptoms, but was diagnosed with migraine. And so in this case, a life was saved. And so this can happen. And I'm sure many other times we have this condition where we tell the person, hey, this is such and such headache. And I had an interview with Dr. Robert Sivas. I don't know if you've known of him. He is one of the best known doctors in the internet world. He's a surgeon, but he is also doing has patients online, and he interviewed me. And he had no idea either of what actually is a migraine. And so he was very surprised when I was explaining to him, because apparently doctors are, I'm not even sure if they're learning about migraine per se, but if whatever they're learning is very vague, and basically every headache type they will say, well, you have a migraine. And so interestingly, he basically, when he is stuck on a patient and can't tell if the patient has migraine or not, he'll ask me to evaluate. And many, many times they don't have a migraine. And it's really interesting. And some of the headache conditions that are extremely similar to migraine are very dangerous. Like it could be an intracranial pressure, hypertension building up in the brain. And it feels very close to migraine. And it has some different symptoms that we have to be very careful of, but is 99% of the time diagnosed as migraine. And that way the person is in danger. So yes, people get offended, but I wrote up a paper on that. And hey, don't get offended. If it tell you it's something else, go and check it out. Have a doctor. Don't argue that, but you have, it's not a badge of honor to have migraine. It's a type of condition. If you don't have it, go and find out what you have rather than stay stuck to saying it's a migraine and mismedicate basically what you're doing.
You have a list of conditions or symptoms to make a difference between migraines and headaches. Let's maybe go through that so people can identify, yes, yes, definitely got migraines, or yes, no, looks like I may have a headache.
Perfect. And so this will respond also to your previous question of the difference between a headache and a migraine. So one of the first questions is that I'm asking is that where exactly does your head hurt? So if your head hurts like everywhere, or the front or the top or the back, or if the headache, for example, gets worse when you bend forward, or gets better when you bend forward, or it changes in any way when you bend forward, or when you lie down, or when you stand up, these are not migraines. So also, if you have only a headache and nothing else, chances of that being a migraine is 0. So you have to look at all kinds of other things. It's very difficult to find what other symptoms you have in addition to the headache. But so here, for example, a typical migraine headache, if there's a headache with migraine, and there need not be a headache with migraine, and we'll talk about that as well. If there's a headache with migraine, it will be hurting on one spot on one side of the head. It's going to feel like somebody hit you with a hammer and left it in there for days. It's just going to be there. So you're going to see a migraine go like this, pulling and whatever. Then that's because that is where it hurts. And it's like a permanent, constant, flat. It doesn't throb, doesn't shoot, doesn't change. It's just there as if somebody glued it to you for 3 days. That would be a migraine, but it has to be, it's absolutely mandatory for it to be one-sided. So if your head hurts on 2 sides, top, back, anywhere like a whole head, that cannot possibly be a migraine, because a migraine is strictly in one hemisphere of the brain. It's nowhere else. There are a lot of videos on the chemical signature, the electricity, how the electricity moves. It's always in one hemisphere of the brain.
Does it change? If say it's always in the one hemisphere, can it change from the front and then go away for a few days and then come back? And is it always stay in the front, or can it then locate to the back over the next
it can't. That's a second migraine or a third migraine.
Okay.
The first migraine, because the problem is, it's a little bit complicated, but I'm trying to narrow it down to simple terms, and then maybe there will be questions later on that. But the actual cause of migraine is if you're looking at the brain and you're looking at the neuron is a brain cell. So most of our cells that we see in our skin are kind of roundish, right? Well, a brain cell is like a long thing with a round head. And so the tail itself is called the axon. And so the axon is used basically to transfer the electricity all through from the head to the boutons, so the very tail, the feet of the neuron. And so this electricity is generated continuously nonstop by each neuron. And this electricity generation itself is the most critical function for which the salt is needed. That's the sodium part of how the electricity is started in one place. And then basically what's happening is the membrane potential carries this high voltage, whatever voltage that is, to the next point. And these points that I'm referring to are areas that are called nodes of Ramier, where there's no insulation. So the insulation is myelin, it's a fat and cholesterol that insulates, just like in an electrical wire, you have to have insulation. And so it's insulated, but in every so frequently, there could be millions of places. There are these nodes of Ramier where there's no myelin, there's no insulation. And so that's where you have all the sodium, voltage-gated potassium, voltage-gated calcium, all these channels are right there. And so all the activity is happening there. So it starts in one place, and then like a car, it moves through the axon. And as it moves through, in each spot, the electricity has to be regenerated. Mm-hmm. If in one spot, there's not enough salt and the electricity, that's the migraine. And then that's the cause of migraine. Okay, so
is that there's a sodium potassium ion reaction or something like that? Or
it's the voltage gated channel, either that you don't have enough sodium or for whatever reason, the voltage gated channel doesn't open or doesn't close. Something is not right now. So genetics, migraine is genetic, as I mentioned earlier. So this is a genetic change. This is actually a variant in every single migraine brain. So if you don't have this, you can't have a migraine. This is migraine that you have. Basically, it's a channelopathy. So channelopathy means that these channels, be it voltage gated sodium or potassium or calcium, one or more work differently from the expected. That's basically the migraine brain, that we have different brain. And so as a result of not having enough sodium, if you, for example, let me bring it to a classical example. You take two people, one a migrainer, one non-migrainer, go into a room, which has a light turned on, and it has certain fragrance released, and it has some music going on, okay? To the non-migrainer, everything will be normal. To the migrainer, it will be too bright, it will be too loud, and it will be too stinky. So the migraine brain has a lot more neuronal connections in the sensory neurons, only the sensory neurons, nothing else. And so the problem in the migraine brain is when the sodium is missing for an activation of a particular neuron, then the inhibition, the GABA, isn't released. And so the overstimulation by the fragrance or by the light or by the sound, you will have a lack of inhibition. And so the brain continues to put in the message all the time, but there is no salt to inhibit the message. So the whole thing stops. Everything stops. It doesn't work. And so this is why the migraine starts. But the brain, time to time, has these episodes of running out of sodium in one place. If you're familiar with the CPR machine, like if somebody gets a heart attack, they will put the CPR machine on to reactivate it by electricity, right? Well, the brain has its own built-in ability to do that. And so this process is called the cortical spreading depression. And that is all the cortical spreading depression does. That is all it does. It releases sodium. It's called a depolarization in technical term. It releases sodium and sends it through the brain to activate every single neuron. And it will go with a speed of about 2.5 millimeter per minute. So it's a slow moving through one hemisphere. Every single neuron is being touched. And the neurons respond, I see, I see, I see, or you don't see. So when you have an aura, you actually see this activity. This is what you see. If you have the kind of visual stimulation where you may have a blind spot in your eye, many migraineurs do, that is exactly the neuron that is blind, that it doesn't work. And so you have a little spot where you are completely blind. There could be all kinds of flying objects in one eye.
Can I ask what is that gene variant?
Okay, it's not one, it's like thousands of genes. It's like there are like over 5,000 genes. So it's really hard to say.
Oh, okay. So yeah, so the migraine brain has several, I mean, or
the brain has several. And then if I go to genecard.org, let me.
Is there one that's prominent, like the ApoE gene everybody talks about?
Yes, so that's exactly what I'm going to look at. So in fact, let me tell you where I went. It's genecards.org. That is the human genome database. And there you can type in migraine. So I just did. So currently there's 4,901 variants for migraine. And the most significant, you really need to look at the first three. Those are the most significant variants, because if you're looking at the score is reflecting how important they are, those are a magnitude bigger than the others. The first one is the sodium potassium transporting channel ATP with ATPase. So that's the pump which takes the sodium and the potassium after the voltage passed and neutralizes that particular opening in the neuron. So it puts the cell into refractory phase for a short few seconds. So that one is the number one variant. Number two, calcium voltage gated channel. That's number two. Third, sodium voltage gated channel. There you go. And potassium voltage gated channel is number 5 in the list. So we're talking about the calcium, sodium, and the sodium potassium ATPase, which is ATP using channel to rebalance the sodium potassium in that particular area in the brain.
Can you tell from a brain scan or some saliva from your genetics what if you have a migraine brain?
No, you can't. What you can see on the MRI, if you've had migraine for a number of years, so what you can see on the MRI is that oftentimes there is called the high intensity something. So there will be some areas in the brain that will shine up reflecting the magnetism that goes through the MRI. This has to be MRI. It's only shown in the MRI. That's going to show up. And that basically is reflecting on myelin damage as a result of the high voltage. But the voltage doesn't want to go, and there's a problem there. So there's going to be some myelin damage there. And so that's going to be like a high intensity, I forget what the term they use in MRI sense. And so that is usually what we see. That is the only thing that we usually see and nothing else. But nearly everybody so far, whatever MRI I've seen, whether the picture or whether I've seen the doctors write up, the radiologists write up, it always had, that was the only thing for migraine. But that's very, very common. So I would say that you could tell probably based on that a person probably has migraines.
So you mentioned hypersensitivity. So the senses are on high alert with the migraine brain.
Right.
Is it with everything, or can someone say, it's the smells that drive me crazy, but I can handle light and sound, for example? Or is it all?
It's individual, because all of these, while they all seem just under sensory to us, for our brain, these are different neurons, right? So it can be that you are just sensitized by one particular. So I have a couple of migraineurs who are extremely sensitized by odor, and they end up with a migraine from odor. Very difficult to control for that, even if it's a mild odor. And yet here I am, and I use perfume every single day. So there are differences. For different persons, it will be different things. That could be all activated, and it could be just one activated. But at least one has to be activated, because that is the migraine by definition.
Okay. So the way I understand it, we have these neurons and we have the axons and we have this channel, this wave that has to happen of electricity in terms of being able to function. Right. And our brain to function. And so what you're saying, that there's like gaps there, the myelin sheaths that protect it are degraded, and maybe some other things. So that's where the sodium, when you're able to take some salt, it sort of, that fills those gaps, if I understand correctly, so that your migraine dissipates.
Right. So it's not really a gap, but it's a that in a particular location, there is less sodium for whatever reason. Sodium is normally in our fluids, in our blood, but for whatever reason, one area has less. We don't know why. Might it be because that area used more in a previous second? Yes, it could be. But normally you have a balance of sodium, potassium everywhere in your blood. But there could be local variations. And these minimal local variations, the reason why they created is because of the migraine brain, which has a different neurons will require different amount of sodium. Because if the migraine brain is hypersensitized for the sensory neurons, then those neurons will require more sodium, but the surrounding neurons won't. And so there's going to be bunching up perhaps in some places and not having other places, which the cortical spreading depression can equalize. So the cortical spreading depression is the definition in terms of technical terms of either seizure or migraine. And that's another point that is important to bring out, is that migraine and seizure are basically the same thing. They just manifest differently.
What? Really? So do migraineurs tend to have seizures?
No,
or always
no.
have seizures?
No. It's the same thing, but is manifested differently. So if you're a migraineur, it's going to manifest as a migraine. And if you're a seizure person, it's going to manifest as a seizure. It doesn't mean that you can't end up with the other. So there are a lot of cases where a seizure is completed by a migraine. And there are some migraineurs, I don't know the percentage, who end up having a seizure because the two are identical in terms of the start and manifestation. What is different is the cortical spreading depression itself. So a person who has seizure, the cortical spreading depression doesn't start in one place of the brain and go slow in a wave motion all through the brain like it does in the case of migraine, but it explodes in one place and it sends all the sodium everywhere in one instant. It's like, I call it a bomb. It's like a bomb going off in one place. And so it activates a whole ton of neurons that are independent neurons in function. So you may see then a seizure to have foam, maybe biting on the tongue, maybe moving arm and leg, maybe can't breathe, maybe all kinds of other things, because it suddenly activates everything. In a migraine, it doesn't activate any one thing. It activates very slowly, but it's not such a high electricity all at once. And so it doesn't create those jerking movements and unrelated things like inability to breathe, unless there's one migraine form, which is a hemiplegic migraine, where the migraine itself, the lack of sodium itself, is in a part of the brain where your main muscle instructions are coming from. And so that person on one side of his or her body will be numb, partially or fully, even present almost like they had a stroke, like one side of the face won't move, but the other one will work. And of course, if it affects the left side of the brain, they won't be able to talk, for example. So I had one migraineur, a boy, a 17-year-old, whose mother I've been working with, and he had one of these, and he ended up also having seizure. So he had both. So there was a video on it, you can see the seizure going on, and he was not able to talk for almost 2 weeks after that.
Could you resolve a seizure with a salt? like you do with a
You
hand?
probably could. You probably could because the mother started to use salt, and consequently, whatever for him, it seems that every single time he had an episode that would start as a migraine but turn into a seizure. And then I haven't talked to her now for a few weeks, but the last time I talked to her, maybe 2 months ago, she just aborted a seizure with salt because she will automatically give him salt, and the salt will stop the migraine, but it aborted, then obviously also aborted the seizure because the two seem to come together for him.
So you call this the cortical spreading depression? Did I?
Right. I don't call it that way. It is called that way. That is a technical, right. It's a cortical spreading, it's a CSD is how you see it in literature, cortical spreading depression. And there are a lot of videos on this. Most are just animations, but there is this one that is in academic article. And in that academic article on the bottom, you scroll all the way to the bottom, they have a video of an actual ongoing migraine. And they accelerate it, of course, because otherwise it can last from 30 to 45 minutes, depending upon the brain size. So it's really quick, but you can see it's a wave of light going basically through the brain.
Amazing. I was watching one of your videos and you pulled up a video of a woman who was an anchor, and she's in the middle of her presentation. She was in the news and there was something happening behind her. And then suddenly she's talking and then you couldn't understand anything she said. And you said, that's what a migraine kind of looks like, because it also, one of the, I guess, the symptoms of knowing you have a migraine is comes with some disruption in speech, right?
Right. It's in the Broca area. So the Broca area is in the left side of the brain, right behind your ear, like about 2 inches in, maybe, about 2 inches in. And so, and that's important to say that our brain is not symmetrical. So you don't have a speech area on the right side of the brain. It's only on one side. And so in her case, and the most interesting part in that particular video is that she didn't even know that she was saying garbled language and nobody understood. And so she had a migraine. And so in her case, not the Broca area, which makes a garbled speech, but also her comprehension, which would be the prefrontal cortex, was also affected by it because she didn't even know that she was doing that. And so that would be a migraine. And like I said, she may or may not have had a headache with it. We don't know. So migraine is definitely not a headache. It has all kinds of other symptoms that it comes with.
So you can have a migraine without feeling the stereotypical migraine.
Right.
Incredible. So some of the list that I have here is, look, got to know where your location is. If it's in one side and it stays there and it doesn't move as you move your head, it doesn't travel around or gets better with bending over, that is a migraine. If you have this genetic variance, which I guess you can look up on this website, if you're hypersensitive, that's another thing. Your sensories, elevated sensories, blind spots, speech impediments, anything else?
There could be none of these symptoms so clear, but there's one symptom that every single migraineur has, and it's not known. It's really fascinating. But in our group, after a number of years, we had some surveys and sent some photos of the people uploading. And what we see is that we don't have equal, perfect symmetry. And I don't know whether, because I'm looking at you now, not at me, I don't know if my two eyes are equal in size. And by that, I mean the actual eye, not the eyeball, but just the actual eye. But what we notice is that if I am about to have a migraine, one of my prodromes is I'm going to end up like this. It's like I can't open
one eye closed.
One eye. It's like a tortoise that it ends up sort of a droopy lid on one eye. And I may see a little puffiness that is more or less than on the other eye, below and above the eye. Like I have very prominent eyelid area. And then before a migraine, I may get it puffy so that these two lines that I naturally have as a curve of my bone there will end up looking different. Like I can see it's a little bit soggy, it's a little bit droopier, but it's over for me, it's always the right eye. So my migraine side is typically, you feel the pain on the left side, everything. It's just really interesting how things appear. But so you can have a host of other symptoms, like for example, that, and I may not come down with a migraine and I may not know that I have a migraine, but I can see in the mirror that I actually do, but my body may be able to compensate just enough, just kind of let me drive through. But if I notice it, like I didn't notice for 40 or 50 years of my life. It took my husband, I've been married now for 51 years, but I've been with him for 52 years, right? And he would tell me, you've got a migraine face. I said, what is a migraine face? And he didn't know what a migraine face was either, but we started to pay attention. And I said, your eye is smaller. One eye is smaller. And so then we recognized, okay, so that is a migraine face for me. And I kept on watching it for a while. And sure enough, every time I had that kind of a face, I would be hit with a migraine pretty soon after that. It could be a few hours, it could be a day, but I would be hit with a migraine. And then in the group, I brought it up that, hey, do you guys also have this? Everybody has it. It's ridiculous if you just didn't know. Once you start, people load up a picture, say, well, here's what I look when I'm healthy. Here's what I look like when I have a migraine. Do I have what you're saying? And I say, yes, you do. And
Wow.
it's really fascinating to see. So we have other symptoms as well. We are just not, or like, for example, moodiness. I may be very chatty and very happy, overly chatty and happy. Then my husband will tell me, hold on, take your salt. You're coming down with some migraine here. Or I can be the opposite. I can be very bitchy and criticize everything, and everything is in the wrong direction. And I will take salt and the world become normal again. So it's just, you can have a whole lot of other things going on and not physically have the pain, but your body is going through the migraine. So you do feel the migraine. And there are a host of other symptoms that precede the migraine that could also happen when you don't have a headache. For example, the most typical, because we're talking about salt, and it's the salt balance that is missing from the brain, the very first symptoms I often have is excess urination.
Excess urination. Oh,
Excess urination.
excess urination.
Meaning I just pee a lot. And that would be connected to the fact that, well, I am actually out of electrolyte balance. And so my kidneys are trying to reset my electrolyte, the osmolality of my blood, to the ideal level. So it will dump water and recycle salt for me to retain the salt. And so here we come to another thing that's biologically, there was a study from 1951 that I found that showed that migraineurs actually are salt wasters. So we urinate a lot more salt and water out than other people do. So we're not recycling the salt as well. So we have some issues that present in other ways as well, but that could be more like a general, and so you're not associating it necessarily with a migraine. But once you're a migraineur and you know you're a migraineur, these are symptoms you can use to really understand right, that you're coming down with something.
So is there at any point you thought, well, I guess you, with your hysterectomy, you were thrown into early menopause, but did you ever think your migraines were related to the loss of hormones?
At the time when I was having migraines, I never associated, I guess I was just too busy having the kids and everything to pay any attention. And before the kids, I didn't have like these kind of migraines, so I wouldn't have had any indication to even pay attention. So I didn't know, actually. It took me by surprise when I went to the group and I discovered how many women have hormonal migraines. So I suspect I simply didn't have that.
Were you given hormones? Oftentimes that's what they give women who are early menopause, or surgical menopause, will put them on hormones right away.
They did. And so what happened was, like before it, I was not on any hormones, and I'm not even remembering the birth control pills. I probably had some, but I never had the like IUD, these kind of things. So I've never really had the opportunity to test those out. But after my menopause or hysterectomy, they put me on estrogen. And that was really fascinating because as a result of that, so immediately after the surgery, my doctor came in and he said, how are you? I said, oh, I'm doing so badly, blah, blah, blah. And so he said, okay, you need estrogen. So he put me on estrogen right away. And from that point on, I was fine. My body was in instant success in terms of recovery, within 5 days back to work, whatever. It was really good. And so I didn't really, right away, didn't feel any different. But as time went on, and of course, from age 42, and now I'm going to be 72 in a couple of months. So we're talking about quite a few years, like 30 years of being on estrogen. And I will be on it, by the way, to the last day of my life. Okay, I will be on estrogen. But I didn't really feel any benefit of the hormonal supplement because it really had nothing to do with it. I would have horrendous number of migraines, and increasingly so, even though my estrogen was the same amount. Now, I can't say that this is true for everyone. Okay, so it just is highly individual. But hormonal variations or hormones themselves do not cause migraine. And this is a
mean
myth,
the lack of having your
or lack of, or having too much, or whatever. No connection whatsoever in terms of causal connection
with migraines, but maybe not
with
necessarily
migraine.
headaches. Like you can have, maybe there's a headache connection with the.
Maybe there's a headache connection. I don't know that, but there's no migraine connection.
Okay.
So the migraine, there is a little connection, but it's not a causal one. So let me cover that. But it's important to tell women of our age, your age, because you're significantly younger than me, but still women of perimenopause, menopause, postmenopause, to let them know that don't blame your hormones because it has nothing to do with hormones. And fixing your hormones is not going to fix your migraine. So you got to fix your migraine. And that may actually fix your hormones because it may be a nutritional connection to your hormones and not the migraine connection. But to show that it has nothing to do with hormones, consider children. who don't yet have period, and they may have migraine, right? Because they're men. What are we going to tell men? They're not menstruating like we do. So it's not hormonal. You may have a hormonal connection in terms of electrolyte balance. And so the hormonal connection to electrolyte balance is that estrogen, when you're estrogen dominant of the month, your kidneys will recycle sodium. So if you continue eating like you did before, and your kidneys are recycling sodium, you're going to end up with too much salt. And so that's going to be too much salt, and that's going to be a problem, particularly if your kidneys don't work ideally, and you don't have ideal function. And when progesterone time of the month comes, you will be wasting salt left and right, and your body, you're going to lose weight, you're going to look wonderful. That is a time where you need to add extra salt. So what we do in the group with women who are in age of still menstrual cycling is we have them stand on the scale every single morning. You wake up, you did your bathroom uses, whatever, before you drink anything, stand on the scale every single day, the same way, and compare your weight to yesterday. And we do that in the morning on empty stomach because we want to get your actual weight, not the weight of your food or water that you drink. So we only look at in the morning, and preferably nude if you can, so even your clothing is subtracted. And so look, and if you gained weight like over a kilo, which would be approximately 2 pounds. So if you gained more than 2 pounds or more than a kilo, then you're estrogen heavy. So you need to then reduce the amount of salt in your diet because you're retaining salt. So allow your kidney just to recycle whatever it wants to recycle. And then when your weight return to normal, then return to normal. And then if you're progesterone heavy, you will lose weight. So if you lost a couple of pounds or a kilo or more, that's progesterone time. So increase salt and water. And here it is important to mention that when I say that increase salt, don't increase it in your food. Increase it in your water. Add salt to water, not to food.
What's the difference?
When you eat food, the food has some water in it, and everything in your stomach, as you chew already in your mouth, and then it comes to your stomach, and your acid and the movements of your stomach that break up the food, they create what's called a chyme. A chyme is a mixed medley of molecules. So look at it as molecules. So we're coming down into the molecular level of things. And it's got a lot of water molecules, a lot of salt molecules, but there's no such a thing as salt molecule. There's sodium and chloride. And there's no such thing as water. There's hydrogen and oxygen, right? And so when we're talking about the molecular function in the stomach, the salt and the water are going to create an electrolyte where these atoms or molecules are going to form an electrical connection. If you do this with water that's with your food, it's going to go through your intestines, through your colon. It's going to be absorbed inside into your cells through the long intestinal passage, because you can't, to separate salt from water requires like a nuclear facility, right? So you're not separating it. Your mitochondria can, but you don't. And so it will run through as food and will be excreted as a feces. If you drink it in water and your stomach is empty, it's just going to go straight into your blood as electrolyte.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. So it's kind of like drinking orange juice versus actually eating the whole orange, right?
Exactly. Well, no, that's not exactly the same, because orange juice is not an electrolyte. So an electrolyte has a property of generating electricity. So its function is going to be very different. So everything that is in an electrolyte, meaning salt and water, or potassium or water, or calcium and water, or magnesium and water, these are electrolytes, will be found in the blood. But you can't find orange juice in your blood, right? So that's not an electrolyte.
Well, sugar, glucose, I guess.
But the sugar has to separate from orange juice. What do you have to do to separate the sugar from the water in the orange juice? You have to evaporate the water. Then you have to still evaporate the orange particles. And what part of your body has fire in it that's going to do that? You don't do that. You can't do that. So the water in the orange juice is part of the orange juice. It's not going to be separated. It's going to be used as food. It's not going to add to you as liquid. So drinking water that has things in it like sugar. So many people drink, for example, electrolytes, and most electrolytes will have sweetener, be it stevia or sugar or whatever else. It will have magnesium, calcium, and all these other things, and potassium in it. This won't work as an electrolyte. It will go through as food. Okay. So an electrolyte will be as take one element. So if you drink water with potassium, that will be moving into your blood directly. If you take water with magnesium, it will move directly into your blood. Take the two, magnesium and potassium combined with water, it may not, because it already is a combined element that are in different proportion in your blood. So that is also very important for you to look to see. And I always tell people to never supplement potassium because when you put potassium in water, or take a tablet, a potassium tablet or capsule with just water, it's going to go to your blood. But when you look at your blood test, look at next time what's called the electrolyte panel, and look at your sodium, your chloride, potassium, magnesium, calcium. These are the electrolyte elements. So look and see what you find in your blood. And what you will find is that there will be in milliequivalent per liter, that's the measurement that is used. Potassium will be between 4 and 5 milliequivalent per liter. Sodium, 135 to 152. So you're talking about 40 times as much sodium in your blood as potassium. So if you're taking a supplement that has about more potassium than sodium, or equal or greatly out of balance, it's not going to go to your blood. That's going to kill you. Okay. So if you take just potassium with water, it's going to go to your blood, it's going to kill you, or it's going to damage you, or cause an increased heart rate.
Wow. So what happens when somebody finds they're potassium deficient and then their doctor recommends them to take a potassium supplement?
Okay, first of all, potassium deficiency in the blood is measured by the kidney test, right? Electrolyte test. What that measures is how well your kidneys work. It's not how much you eat. And so if you're deficient in potassium, you may not eat enough, as well as your kidneys aren't retaining the potassium enough, aren't recycling the potassium enough. And the potassium, so here you also have to talk about a little bit about the molecular size. So when you're looking at a molecule, you look at the kidney. Let me talk about the kidney. So in the middle of the kidney, there is a tube, nephron, which is responsible to excreting the sodium or excreting the potassium or recycling. So what this tube is, think of it as a straw with holes. And all the holes are approximately the same size. And then when your kidneys have to recycle sodium, there will be a constriction, a vasoconstriction within the kidneys to reduce the size of the holes in the straw so that the sodium can't leave, just the water can. And the same goes with the potassium, magnesium, calcium. The problem is that all of them pass through this one same straw. And the sizes of these molecules differ. Sodium is the smallest, then comes magnesium, I believe, then comes calcium, and then comes potassium. So potassium is a factor larger than sodium. So if you don't eat enough potassium, your kidneys can recycle potassium because they're so big that they won't excrete, they will recycle. So that's the status quo actually for the sodium and for the potassium. The sodium excretes and potassium recycles. But when you take a lot of potassium like this and you have suddenly too much potassium, this straw will have to cause a massive vasodilation, but that will let out everything, the sodium, calcium, magnesium, and the potassium, because the rest are much smaller, so they all go through. So that causes a massive dehydration. So for this reason, you can only lose very, very little potassium through the urine. You almost lose nothing ever. And this is why I actually wrote an article, which is on Hormones Matter. I will send you the link to that, that explains, I'm interviewing an ER doctor, a cardiologist, a heart surgeon, and he explains how many things they have to do when a patient comes in whose potassium is too high in the blood, because it can't be excreted by the kidneys sufficiently. So they have to put in sugar, insulin, I don't know, like 4 or 5 different drugs to get that potassium out of there. It shouldn't be in the blood in that amount if it's the normal is between like 4 and 5. And the sodium is like 135 to 152 or something. Clearly, what you need to supplement then is the sodium. And also because sodium is what you evaporate, it's the smallest molecule. It passes through everything.
So then would you say electrolytes, the kinds that are advertised everywhere, is not a good idea to take because there's probably a lot of potassium in there? Like everything's, but not maybe not necessarily for the migraines, but just for a person in general, or just
anyone. I don't recommend to anyone
to take electrolytes.
It's ridiculously unhealthy. Not to mention if you put sweetener in it, it immediately disrupts the electrolyte property. It's no longer a property. It doesn't matter whether it's sugar or stevia or whatever, allulose or whatever else. It's no longer an electrolyte. You disrupted the entire electrical property of the product. It's no longer an electrolyte.
That's, yeah, we're talking about those powders that you buy online. But what about there's fulvic and humic acid and they're like more like a liquid? Does that not make a difference?
Do you have fulvic and humic acid in your electrolyte? I don't think so. Electrolyte is salt and water.
Yeah.
Or potassium and water. Or it's just a metal with a water. That's the electrolyte. The definition of electrolyte is a liquid that can carry electricity. Where do other stuff carry electricity?
This is like, this will save us a lot of money. It was just adding a little bit of
absolutely
to our water.
This is what I'm taking. This is salt in a capsule. Here you go. Your salt. Now in this one, I have a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of potassium because I didn't want to use the kind of bad they have to use some substance for the filler, for
Yeah.
the capsules. And I'm using a very tiny amount of potassium, 20 milligrams, which is nothing. And so that's totally fine to be used. And so this is, for example, salt, there's an N on it, meaning this is not with iodine. So I designed this for me. I have two kinds of one with iodine and without iodine. And so the company that ended up manufacturing it is actually my son's company, but he initially just bought them for me because I couldn't take salt because salt is an emetic. It makes some people vomit right away. And I happen to be one of them. I vomit, lovely.
Okay, I was trying to figure out why would you take a supplement when you could just use a pinch of salt, like you said.
Right. Not everybody can do that, unfortunately. And even salt pills that were not coated, which you can buy, pressed salt pill, I would still come back up.
Will you give us a link then to that supplement?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
If you can, then you're saying then the cheapest and easiest way is to take a pinch of salt and put it in your water, assuming you tolerate it. What about the people with high blood pressure or problems with salt? What do they do?
Love your question. This is my favorite question to answer. Nothing to do with salt. Actually, there's a lot of literature out there that it has nothing to do with salt. And a lot of doctors are not saying it has nothing to do with salt. And it's totally correct. So let me explain this one too, because this is the most important, I think, for us women. And I'm really at fault too, because we are all, or most of us, are carb addicts. But what causes high blood pressure is the carbs. We have to face truth, okay, and reality, that salt, which is always in our blood, is not going to cause a problem in the blood. We evolved with salt in our blood. And the amount of sugar that is in our blood, we don't need to eat this stuff. Our liver makes glycogen, which is a human starch, basically, and then it breaks down into glucose when it leaves the liver, goes through the duodenum, and it becomes sugar for the rest of the body. So we make all the sugar that we need. We don't need to eat any. And if we choose to eat it, it messes things up because all that sugar in the blood. So this is going to be a little bit technical, but let me see if I can explain it in an affable way. So when you eat carbohydrates, be it so-called good complex carbohydrates like wheat bread or any
vegetable
fruits or vegetables with high fiber, it doesn't really matter. The sugar is sugar. It's going to come out of there. And the moment it's out of there, it's going to be a problem for you. So it doesn't matter.
Yeah. So when you're talking carbohydrates, you're not just talking about the high refined carbohydrates.
I'm talking about all carbohydrates.
Good, quote unquote, good and bad ones. Okay.
All of them. Okay. Every time you eat a carbohydrate, even if you eat spinach, it doesn't make any difference what carbohydrate you eat. All plants basically only make carbohydrates. That is how they live. So that is what you're eating. Carbohydrates and fiber, basically that's it. And so the carbohydrates, when you eat it, it will break immediately down in your stomach into sugar. And the sugar is then going to start its avenue through your intestines. And then from intestines, it's going to be uploaded into your blood vessels, okay? This is where the problem is going to start. Well, continue, because we have other problems before that, but to continue. So inside your blood vessels, think of the blood vessel as a muscle, which is what it in fact is. It can dilate, it can constrict, it's a muscle, several layers of muscle, basically. And the inside layer is coated with what is called the endothelial wall. It's cells that are very thin, and they're sort of kind of holding their hands very tightly connected. And they have a coating on them, which is called the glycocalyx. And so think of the glycocalyx as, if you've ever had a fish in your hand that was really slippery, it is slippery because it is coated with glycocalyx. It's the same stuff. And so the job of the glycocalyx in terms of the fish is to allow the fish to go slide in water in one direction really quickly, but not so backwards. So that's why you don't see fish going backwards too much. In our blood, the same thing. The blood should only flow in one direction and not back. So the glycocalyx's job is to make sure that the blood flows in one direction and in a speedy fashion. And however, this glycocalyx is made of a material that it gets destroyed by sugar. Okay, so it regenerates every 8 to 12 hours. It fully regenerates. But in that 8 to 12 hours, if you eat again sugar, you just destroyed it again. And then you eat again, you just destroyed it again. So under modern dietary guidelines, where you're supposed to eat 3 to 5 meals a day, you are destroying it 3 to 5 times a day. It has no chance to regenerate. So if you don't have this glycocalyx, then two things happen. One, your blood no longer just flows in one direction. It may flow backwards or stop or whatever. Two, the endothelium that the glycocalyx is supposed to protect, which is a very thin layer protecting the wall of your blood vessels so nothing can go through, suddenly things can get stuck to it. And things can go through the endothelial wall itself. Most famously, cholesterol particles can go through, not the particles, but the LDL itself, which is basically a sphere in which the cholesterol can go through. and can get stuck and can get lodged in the wall of the arteries, making the arteries narrower. So when you're making the arteries narrower, it's not that it's inside your blood vessel, there's cholesterol that is sticking to the wall, but the cholesterol is able to go through, and all kinds of other particles, by the way. It's not just cholesterol, it's also calcium, it's also other white blood cells. They all go through and try to get rid of, actually the white blood cells are there to try to get rid of this particular buildup. And then from the outside, there's going to be a cholesterol buildup because now your blood vessel there is in great danger of breaking. And so the cholesterol is going to be used as a glue, basically. It's to cure that particular spot, to prevent it from tearing open and give you basically that you lose all your blood. And so
It's
in
like
that
a rescue
area,
mission gone wrong.
exactly. And so in that
Intention, but
area, what
much.
you're going to see is that your blood vessel is going to get tighter, 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 tighter. It will reach a point where, number one, it's going to become dangerous because the narrowing itself accelerates the red blood cells going through. That's your high blood pressure.
That sounds very much like Dr. Richard Johnson, who we interviewed, who wrote the book Nature Wants to Make Us Fat. And
I have it right.
yes, and so he said the same thing. It's not the salt that's the problem; it's the sugars. And his in particular is fructose. Is he's quite does a lot of research. I think he's wrote
right. That is also glucose. It's both really.
So, but what's interesting, he said, if you're worried, it was more like if you're going to eat a lot of salt, then make sure you hydrate and you drink a lot of water as well. So not to sort of, I guess, worry about it so much, and obviously cut out the sugars.
Can I add to this a little bit?
Please.
To sort of explain why he said that, because it may not be clear to your audience of why he said that. And I think that is very important. I love all these guys, doctors and scientists and researchers, particularly him in talking, but to me, they always leave the sentence unfinished to those not educated in science so well. So the reason why he's mentioning to hydrate well, there are several reasons for it that I previously mentioned, that water is essential, obviously, for your liver, for your kidneys to clear things. But there's another reason. So if you're eating carbohydrates and your blood sugar suddenly increases to above the norm of what your body considers the norm, and we'll talk about that too perhaps later. If it increases, then you have to remove the excess glucose from your blood, right? Excess glucose and excess fructose. You have to remove the sugars from your blood. And in the process of removing the sugar from your blood, you're actually having a problem right away. Because in order for the sugar to enter a cell, meaning out of your blood, entering a cell, which is the goal for us to remove the glucose, right? In order for the glucose to enter the cell, it needs sodium. And so it actually removes sodium and water from the cell. And so why water? Well, water, because if you look at a glucose molecule is basically 6 carbon and 6 water molecules. That's it. So you have 6 water molecules going into every single cell in delivering 6 carbon molecules. So 6 water molecules have to come out because the cell was not empty, it was full. So it's a natural replacement. If something is full and you put 6 more something in it, 6 something has to come out. It's just natural. And the salt has to come out because of the glucose transport itself. It's going to be using voltage-gated channel assistance to go into the cell. So it's not a passive diffusion into the cell. In some places it is, but very seldom. Most of our bodies, it's not a passive flow of glucose into the cell, because oftentimes, particularly in the case of metabolic disease, your cells are full of glucose already. They don't want more glucose. So if you're just waiting for the glucose to be ready to go in, it won't be allowed in. So it has to be pushed in. And so sodium is the primary glucose transport, pushing the glucose into the cells against its gradient, against the glucose gradient, not against the sodium gradient, against the glucose gradient. And even when you're using insulin, so we all think of insulin as a primary hormone to take the glucose out of the blood, but actually insulin is just forced into that role. That is not its natural role to do that. It is really a growth hormone. It is meant to be using the protein, the amino acids to start protein synthesis and use whatever glucose is necessary for that. It's not meant to just continuously come and grab the glucose out of the blood and take it to cells. That's not what its job is. And so it's just maybe like for bears, for hibernation, come fall or winter, we will pile up. So they will use insulin at that time. And also Dr. Richard Johnson will have the same thing, that it's natural for the insulin to increase. And so we pack everything away and we basically become diabetic, as the bear is, when it goes to hibernation, totally normal. But then it doesn't eat for 6 months, right? So then it sort of kind of comes out of it. And so as long as we humans don't eat for 6 months after fattening up in the fall, we're fine. But we're not fine given that we continue eating and continue eating quite unseasonably grapes and strawberries and raspberries and watermelon in the middle of winter, right? So this is where the problem is, where we're connecting the water and the salt and the glucose transport in the system. So you do need to, and so if you are, for example, diabetic, you will be urinating all the time. It's famous. This is why, because every time the glucose enters the cell, water will come out. So you're going to be urinating a lot. And you will think that then you're not going to drink because you're drinking too much and that's why you're urinating, but you're eating the apple. And then your apple is going to make you urinate more, dehydrating you in the process, but you didn't drink water. So then you end up sick. So it's a vicious circle.
And I remember, Dr. Johnson said the moment you feel thirsty, you're already storing fat. Like that.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. You're storing fat. And if you're feeling thirsty, your best bet is to take salt, not water, salt.
Who would have guessed? Okay, so we have two questions. I want to get to the salt thing and understand a bit more what kind of salt, what does it matter? But before we do that, just one question I'm thinking is, you said that all different kinds of people, babies, older adults, men, women, have migraines, and it can happen at any time. Do you notice it with women going through menopause? Does it get worse?
Yeah, much worse for most of them. Not some of them. Okay, and this is not necessarily a good thing to talk about, but I've had a couple of people come to me, well, my migraine disappeared when I got menopause. That's actually a bad sign, because that's a sign that your brain degenerated. It lost its ability for the extrasensory connections and the need for the extra salt. So that's not a good news necessarily. I understand that getting rid of your migraine is a good thing, but having your brain degenerate to reach that may not be ideal.
That's amazing. I would never have guessed. So, okay, anyone who's listening now and the migraines are gone, pay attention. I guess should they still randomly add salt to their water, or should they go see a doctor, take some tests to see their brain function, or what?
To see the brain function, I would say get one MRI to make sure everything is okay, that you don't have a tumor or some other kind of a brain disease. But since migraine is not visible in the brain, there's nothing you can do looking at brain scans or brain exam. And if you go to a neurologist, you're going to get a bunch of medications. If that's not what you want, I mean, it's okay. If you prefer to handle migraine that way, by all means. But if that's not what you want, then don't go to the doctor, because there's no point. And so basically what you want to do is, number one, if you've never had migraines in your life, like my husband is not a migrainer, I make him take salt with water. Sure, just a little bit less salt than I do. But he still takes salt to every single cup of water.
So let's talk about then the salt routine. And you said, right, when you feel a migraine coming on, it's sort of take a pinch of salt. But how much are we really talking about? Like a quarter teaspoon and in the water in the morning? Like what's the protocol? Or, I mean, I'm sure you detail this in your book, which people should go buy anyways.
Right, in the book, and better yet, in the group, actually, where I'm working on my third edition of the book to come to the final, because now I think pretty much everything. I may be surprised, but maybe everything. But in the group is the best way to come to learn
the Facebook
how much and how to do. And the group is free, so that's actually a good place to go to. A book is not expensive, but it tells you migraine, but it doesn't give you the protocol. So I do have a protocol, actually several protocols within the protocol. And so the amount of salt, interestingly, it varies based on migraineurs, because we have some other conditions that are variant and part of migraine. And so this is also important, because if you have some of these conditions and you've never been diagnosed with migraine, these are comorbidities with migraine. So there's a good chance that you may also have migraine. You just perhaps don't know. And the primary condition is Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is just referred to as EDS, is a condition where your collagen isn't produced properly in your body. And so it can create hyperflexibility. So for example, when I was a child, I could literally wrap myself around me. I mean, it was ridiculous hyperflexibility.
Me
Some
too.
People, oh, do you? Okay, there you go. So what I found is, when I went into the study at genecards.org and I downloaded all the variables for EDS, there's also Raynaud's disease, which is where your fingers turn color when you are cold, or maybe red when you touch cold for a long time or in cold air. And there's rosacea is another one. But EDS is a prime. And also POTS, postural orthostatic tachycardia. So these are comorbidities with migraine. So EDS is the biggest comorbidity, which I find that probably about 70-80% of the people in the group have. Not that everybody was diagnosed, but they all can do everything the same way. So we obviously all are. Like my skin, if I pull it up, I don't want to, because it looks silly. It will grow. Like I can pull it up, really stretchy skin. if you bruise very easily, like I can sit here and get a bruise on my finger just from sitting here and talking to you, and then it'll pop the blood vessel inside, and that is another one. I mean, there's all types of symptoms. But so when I did the genetic overlap, I found that if you're a migrainer, there is something like a 70%, there's about a 70% chance that you also have EDS. And if you have EDS, there is a 50% chance that you also are a migrainer, or something like that is what it came out based on the known variants overlapping. So that means that about 70% of genes were overlapping. If you're a migraine, look at the migraine gene, 70% of the EDS genes matched the migraine genes. But if you were backwards, it was different. So it was that's about the probability. And so POTS, I haven't looked at the POTS yet on genetic marker. Raynaud's was smaller, like 30 or 40%. I have an article on this also on hormonesmatter.com that I wrote many years ago.
So the salt, let's get back to the salt thing, because I would like to understand how
So these are the variants. So that's why.
I see. Okay.
Okay.
And then I want to know what kind of salt as well. We're going to go.
Right. Okay. So it's important to know whether the people have these kind of variants and also POTS. Okay. So POTS is a very common variant, something I also have. So how much salt you take will depend upon these variables, particularly POTS. Okay. Because if you don't have migraine but have POTS, you will be told by your doctor to take a ton of salt with water. Okay. If you have migraine and have POTS, you will have to take even more salt because you're taking it for POTS as well as for migraine. If you have EDS with migraine, you will want to take a little bit more salt because it's going to help potentially with your internal, maybe helping you better the collagen building and all. So it's independent from how much protein you eat from meat because it's a different process. And if you have none of these, you just have migraine, you will take a preset amount of salt. And if you have no migraine whatsoever, you will take about half that. So a person who just has migraine and nothing else will take 1/8 of a teaspoon salt per 8-ounce cup or glass of water.
Got it.
And that will be with every single glass of water.
Okay. So if they're having a full bottle, I guess.
Then just pre-measure of how much salt that would be. Right. So for example, I normally drink 40 ounces of water. Then if I could put salt in it, I would be putting in 5 cups equivalent of salt. Each of them would be then 1/8 of a teaspoon. And so you can buy these teaspoon things from like Amazon or elsewhere where it's like a spiced set. You can select there's even smaller. So like for children, it's like 1/16 of a teaspoon. For people who don't have migraine, children, it may be 1/32 of a teaspoon. So it depends. It's just a little bit.
Yeah.
Now, people who have POTS will be told to take salt about 1/8 of a teaspoon or so, or maybe more by their doctors. But if you're also migraineurs, I mean, I'm taking 2 to 3 salt capsules per cup. So it would be 1/4 to 3/8 of a teaspoon per 8-ounce cup of water. So that's a lot of salt. So that's another reason why most of us will end up taking the salt capsules, because now we're getting to be really salty water. So it's not just a little salt.
Yeah, exactly. I can just imagine after a while. So somebody can't put something else in the water
no, you can't take anything else in it because it destroys the electrolyte property. And it also doesn't improve the taste enough. If you're sensitive to salt, you're sensitive to salt.
Yeah.
It's going to come back up. So nothing you can do about it.
So then, and does it matter if somebody feeling a migraine coming on, they start to drink the water with the salt, or is this something they should just drink all throughout the day?
Okay, this is something you drink all throughout the day. And if in addition to this, you still come down with a migraine, you have to then start and ask yourself, what did I do in the past 24 hours? So you have to go back at least 24 hours. Did I eat too much carbs? If you did, then you should take salt, but no water.
Oh.
Because remember what carbs do, when glucose enters the cells, water comes out of the cell. So taking more water is just going to send the water to the wrong place. You have plenty of water in you. What you want is to pull the edema. Now it's in edema, it's in your ankles, it's under your eyes, puffy face, whatever. So what you want to do is you take salt with just a sip water just to get it down. And then the salt pulls water out of wherever it is at. And it's going to pull it back into your blood where you can urinate it out. So if you wake up with puffy eyes, you take 1 salt capsule, and within 20 minutes, it's all gone.
I see. Okay. So you don't have to be a nausea person or vomiting person to take these capsules. It sounds like it made it easier.
No, the capsule, I've been taking this now in a capsule for almost 10 years. I think this company has been in business now for 8 years as a result of me wanting this. And I haven't once vomited as a result of it. Yeah. Now, if I take too much salt very suddenly, and if I have something else in my stomach, like this morning, for example, then I will have sort of kind of not vomit, but it's not going to come back up, but I will have a little bit of can't even think of the word. Gosh, that was more than nausea. It's like
like reflux.
It's not a reflux. It's actually you're ready to vomit, but nothing comes up.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah.
And that is that word. I can't think of that word or what that is. Anyway,
What about the type of salt? Does it matter? Because there's Himalayan and sea salt and
right, it matters. And I'm glad that you're asking because if you consider what salt is, so where does salt come from? It actually comes from volcanoes. Okay. Salt is coming from volcanoes. It's a natural mineral. And so there is no water in the world without salt, just to get that down, except fresh rainwater and the first ice before it started running in the river. Those are without salt. But the moment they started running, there with salt. The problem is that what else is it in these waters? So if you're looking at ocean or sea salt, or looking at Himalayan, which was the sea salt, it just actually lifted tectonic movement and it's now in a cave high above in the Himalayas, right? So if you're, and by high above, I don't mean very high, it's just not in the water. So if you're looking at it this way, then there's a whole lot of tectonic elements are within the salt. So what are the tectonic elements? What else is in mountains? Iron, mercury, lead, arsenic, all these kind of things, aluminum, are in your salt. The pretty orange, reddish color in the Himalayan salt is rust. It's oxidized iron. Now, why would I ever want to put that in my body? So this much for Himalayan salt, not to mention that it's also radioactive a little bit and it's full of lead and mercury and heavy metals. I mean, here we are trying to remove it and the filling from our teeth, but then we eat Himalayan salt day and night, right? It makes zero sense whatsoever. So no Himalayan salt, no cave salt, because all the caves are caves as a result of being tectonically lifted. And so with the weight of the mountain falling on top of the caves, there is going to be heavy metal in them. It's just no other way.
what
Now,
about sea salt?
sea salt. If I gave you a glass and sent you to your local sea, would you drink a cup of seawater from that?
No, but you'd think it's cleaned.
The cleanest possible seawater, go to the Bahamas or wherever, and I give you a glass, fill it with the seawater, would you drink it?
No, no.
No.
You
Why not?
wouldn't
Because
take,
all the stuff is in it, right? I
yeah,
mean, you got a fish pooping and peeing and dying, and then you got all these organic leftover materials, right?
yeah.
So why would you eat sea salt? Sea salt is salt that is naturally evaporated by the sun. So all the stuff that was in water is now in your salt, concentrated, dried on it. Would you like to eat
Worse.
that?
Better to drink it. Oh no.
Oh, there
So,
you go. So what salt do you want to eat? I'm eating what's called purified salt. So what is a purified salt? Purified salt is when they wash the salt with water after they took it out of the ocean. They wash the salt and then they heat it at high temperature to kill everything. And that's pure salt, as pure as we can get today without having a chemistry lab, right? And
yeah.
that would be your standard table salt. Now, the problem that I see with the standard table salt is that different countries have different kind of chemicals added to prevent the caking or whatever it's called, anti-caking. And so particularly the ones in Europe are pretty nasty, like
No.
E535 or whatever they call it. I don't know what, but we looked at each and every one of them and all of them are nasty. At least in the US, they give us the names of these things. So we know it's ferrocyanide. So I say, oh, ferro, iron, cyanide, cyanide. Do I want that in my salt to eat? Do I want to eat cyanide? No. So you got to look at some of these chemicals, and it's easier in the US because we don't have numbers, we have names. And but the best thing is to get the kind of salt that has zero chemicals added. So for that, look for the salt that is used for pickling and canning because those are without anything added.
Where do
Because
you,
you can't
what's it called?
pickling, the
Pickling.
salt that you would be using for pickling or canning.
Ah,
And
where do
so
you
in the
get that?
US, yeah, well, you can get it online or in the store because if you do pickling in the summer, like your pickles, and you create your homemade pickles, you will be using that salt. You won't be using your table salt because that's just going to rot your pickles.
Ah,
Okay, so you actually want to get the kind. So in the US, I get Morton
just
pickling and
Morton's, the one
canning.
with the girl in the umbrella.
Okay, that's a table salt, but it comes like in 4 different forms. And this is not the table salt. This is like in a big box, 4 pounds at the time. It's in a green big box, and it is very specifically canning and pickling. And then for cooking, I will be using the Morton with iodine, and
Mm,
that's going to be the one with the girl, but it's the black tumbler. If I'm looking at they have, for whatever reason, a light blue tumbler, which
mm,
is the same salt, but it has ferrocyanide in it.
mhm.
So I don't know why they did that. So you have a really hard way to avoid that. So if you can't avoid it, then just have the pickling and canning salt, and you can buy iodine and supplement iodine. And so that's another thing that's very important for women, particularly of the age group that you are supporting, is to supplement iodine. So I find that about 70% of the people coming into my group, women of peri or postmenopausal age, will have hypothyroid function and will be taking medication.
Yeah.
And that can be totally prevented by simply supplementing iodine.
Yeah. Yeah, we're going to do a whole episode on iodine with Sarah Banta on this coming up soon. So
Yeah,
I'm
very good.
excited about that. So,
Yeah,
okay. So for women, it's no matter where she is in the world listening, she really should just be looking at the box and make sure there's no extra
always.
chemicals and it's just plain table salt, right? With no
Exactly.
extra numbers. Okay.
Exactly.
Wow. I have to let you go because I have taken so much of your time and I have 20 more questions for you, but we're going to have to let you go and send everybody to your Facebook group. I'll have that in the show notes. It's Angela A. Stanton, PhD is the Facebook, but is that the group or
No, that's just my personal page or
okay.
my public page. The Facebook group is actually Migraine Sufferers. So one word.
Yeah,
So you go to Facebook groups and under groups, search for Migraine Sufferers in one word. And
that's
it's
right.
going to give
I
you the group.
remember joined that. Yeah, I just remembered that. Okay, because I have my notes. I'll have the notes to your private Facebook, to the Migraine Sufferers Facebook group, LinkedIn, and your book, The Fighting the Migraine Epidemic, the
Right.
complete guide how to treat and prevent migraines with that medicine. You'll let us know when the next edition will come out. But I think
Given how busy I am, and it's ridiculous. Every single day is just going from interview, and then I now then back to the gym to weightlift at least 3 times a week. So like I was supposed to have it right now. I should be in the middle of it right now, but I rescheduled it for yesterday. So it's just I'm so busy. I don't have time. I need more than 25 hours. I need 28, 40 hours a day to do all the things I want to do. So I don't have time. It's ridiculous. But I'm working on it just very, very slow because it's like a page a day sort of thing.
yeah, wonderful. Well, before we let you go, would you like to share maybe your top 2 or 3 tips for women who's struggling right now with migraines?
Yeah, we never actually talked about how to really prevent the hormonal migraine things, but we talked about the weight. So it's important for all women, I think, to measure their weight because even if you no longer have cycles, you still have some hormonal cycle built into you, and that's going to be with you forever. I mean, I just had a blood test and I'm taking estrogen. I'm not taking anything else. And this particular blood test, which is through Function, by the way, in the US, it's a new thing and it's fantastic. When you take this test, they also tested all my female hormones, estrogen, progesterone, all of them. And they're all perfectly within range. I said, wow. And all I'm taking is estrogen, and I've been without female hormones for 30 years, right? So it is fantastic to know where you stand. So they should check and they should control for it and they should adjust according to their need, obviously. But this also shows that you still have possibility of hormonal variations, even if you don't have your menstrual cycle. You have all your hormones functioning. And so it is therefore important for the rest of your life to measure your weight. So if your weight from one day to the next, it could be because you're coming down with a bug. Whatever the reason it is that your weight increased or decreased, increase typically means you're about to come down with a bug because you're retaining water and your body retains water to help the white blood cells to develop and to fight with the mucus and whatever else phlegm that they have to create, which requires a lot of moisture. So it is a good sign to actually pay attention to that you can adjust your hydration accordingly. Mm-hmm. And so that's going to help you prevent not just migraine, but also maybe obesity or whatever other concerns you have. So we haven't talked about that part. And I think this is very important for them to watch. And the prime importance, whether you have migraines or not, just add salt to your water. It is so easy to do. And it will totally change your skin. I mean, my skin
it's amazing. People go to you.
Yeah, I barely, I mean, you go close, you don't see any. I've got some minor things, and I never had a facelift. I never even been to a cosmetician, never had a face massage or anything like that. Just drinking the right kind of hydration in the right amount is going to totally change your skin. I mean, if
you
you
don't
want
eat sugar and you don't drink alcohol, I'm sure you don't.
I don't drink alcohol because I don't like what it does to me. It's not like I'm against it. I just simply don't care for it. But I do love sugar, and I have gained a little weight as a result of lately. Sort of I said, man, I just got to have that. So I just have, so time to time, we just go off the rail. What can I say? But the skin, as long as you stay hydrated tremendously, and not just water, but salt and water, your skin is going to greatly benefit from it. I mean, amazing changes that you're going to have. Can't even compare. So I recommend for every single woman to start putting salt into the water and to calculate how much water they drink, because everybody underdrinks. I, for my weight, need to drink 11 to 12 cups of water a day. But everywhere you look, they're going to tell you, well, just 8 cups, that's enough. But no, it's not enough. You may need much more, depends on your weight, or maybe you need less depending upon your weight.
Perfect.
So, and stuff like that. So these would be important things to still talk about and do things. And of course, the nutrition method, carbohydrates versus not having carbohydrates, that would be very important to talk about. And how much protein. We didn't even come
I
close
know
to
we'll
talking
have to
about
have
it.
you on again.
God,
Honestly,
protein, you know, I have so many interviews on protein because I'm so high on protein and women. I
yeah,
eat a tremendous amount of protein.
yeah.
And at age 72 or 71, still not a couple of months, I'm growing muscles. I mean,
Yes.
really.
Oh, you can at any age. It's no problem at all.
But not that you would know that from the literature.
That's true. But now we're proving it and you're proving it. And I appreciate you so much. I hope to have you on again. It's been a
Sure.
pleasure talking to you. I hope everybody enjoyed this episode. And if you did, please go wait and review and let us know that you liked Dr. Angela and you'd want her back. So wonderful. Have a wonderful day, a good day, good night, good morning, wherever everybody's listening to you. And we'll see you next time.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. It was really a pleasure meeting you and talking to you, and looking forward to next time, anytime.